She is standing outside the camp, alone. This is the same woman who once stood on the shore of the Red Sea, tambourine in hand, leading every woman in Israel in a song of victory. The same woman who watched over Moses as an infant, hidden in a basket of reeds, and saved the future of an entire nation before she was even old enough to understand what she'd done. Now, her skin is white, like snow, like death. She has been struck by God Himself, cast outside the camp she once led in worship, outside the people she helped set free. But here's what almost no one talks about. Her brother Aaron said the exact same words she did, word for word, and he walked away untouched. So why did only Miriam get struck? The answer isn't what you think. And once you understand it, you will never read the rest of her story the same way again. Before there was a nation of Israel walking free, there was a baby in a basket and a sister watching from the reeds. Scripture doesn't even need to name her in that moment for us to know who she is. A young girl, crouched at the riverbank, eyes fixed on a floating cradle holding her infant brother, sent there by a mother desperate to save him from Pharaoh's death sentence. She watches Pharaoh's own daughter draw the basket from the water, and then, without hesitation, she steps forward and offers herself as the link between her doomed family and the palace that could save him. That brother is Moses, and the sister who saved him before he ever saved anyone else. Tradition holds that this is Miriam. Fast forward decades. Israel is no longer enslaved. The sea has just split in two, swallowed an army, and set a nation free. And in that moment of impossible deliverance, who does Scripture say leads the people in worship? Not Moses alone. Exodus 15:20 turns the camera to her directly. Then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her with timbrels and dancing. Read that title again. Prophetess. Not Moses' sister, not Aaron's helper. A prophetess. The first woman in the entire Bible to carry that word. In a culture where women rarely appear in the historical record at all, Miriam doesn't just appear. She leads. And this isn't a one-time honor that fades into the background. Centuries later, the prophet Micah looks back on the entire story of the Exodus and tells the people exactly who God used to set them free. I brought you up out of Egypt, and I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. 3 names, not 2. Miriam stands in the same sentence as Moses, the man who spoke with God face to face, and Aaron, the first high priest of Israel. This is not a minor character. This is one of the 3 pillars holding up the entire story of the Exodus, which is exactly why what happens next is so hard to watch. Numbers chapter 12 opens with a sentence that sounds, on the surface, almost forgettable. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of his Cushite wife. A family disagreement. A passing comment about a marriage. That's how most people read it, and then they move on. But the original Hebrew is hiding something most translations smooth over. The verb spoke against is written in the feminine singular. In Hebrew, that's not a small grammatical detail. It's a fingerprint. It means Miriam is the one driving this. She's the instigator. Aaron is simply standing beside her, going along with what she started. The text is quietly telling us, this conflict has her name on it. But here's where it gets more revealing. If you stop at verse 1, you'd think this was about a wife. Read verse 2, and the entire complaint changes shape. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't He spoken through us too? Notice what just happened. The conversation about a marriage was never really about a marriage. It was the opening move. The real grievance underneath it is about authority, about status, about who gets to be God's mouthpiece, and who doesn't. Miriam isn't asking, why did he marry her? She's asking, why does he get to be the one God speaks through, when I'm a prophetess too? And there may be a reason this resentment surfaces exactly now. Just one chapter earlier, in Numbers 11, God had taken some of his spirit and placed it on 70 elders, giving them prophetic ability they didn't have before. Suddenly, the circle of people who can speak for God has widened. If you were someone who already carried the title Prophetess, watching that circle expand to 70 strangers might raise an uncomfortable question. If they can have this gift, why is Moses still treated as untouchable? Why is my voice still secondary to his? This is the part of the story worth sitting with because it's not ancient or unfamiliar at all. It's a pattern as old as human relationships, a complaint about someone's personal life, their choices, their character, that on closer inspection is really about something else entirely. Comparison, being overlooked, wanting the recognition someone else is getting. Miriam dresses her resentment up as concern over a marriage. But what God hears is a challenge to the order he himself put in place. And God is about to respond to that challenge directly. What happens next is not a quiet rebuke whispered in private. It's a summons. Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. God doesn't pull Miriam aside. He doesn't deal with her behind closed doors. He calls all three of them, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, out in front of everyone into the open, to the one place in the entire camp where heaven and earth met. And then the sky itself moves. A pillar of cloud descends and stands at the entrance of the tent. This is the same cloud that had led Israel through the wilderness. The same presence that had filled the mountain at Sinai. It comes down now, low and close, and calls Miriam and Aaron forward by name. What God says next draws a line so sharp it's almost uncomfortable to read. He tells them how he normally speaks to prophets, through visions, through dreams, through riddles and indirect glimpses of truth. That's the category Miriam belongs to. Then he says this, "But not so with my servant Moses. I speak to him face to face, clearly, not in riddles." This is not God flattering Moses. This is God explaining a structure, a design. In the order he has set up, Moses occupies a unique position, and that position isn't up for renegotiation by committee, even a committee made up of two of the most significant people in the nation. Then comes the question that should make anyone watching this story sit up straight. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Not afraid. Pause on that phrasing for a second. God isn't asking why Miriam was wrong. He's asking why she wasn't afraid. Which tells you everything about how seriously this is being treated. Speaking against a God-appointed leader in this story isn't filed under family disagreement or personal opinion. It's treated as something that should have provoked fear, because it isn't really an attack on a man's reputation. It's an attack on the order God himself put in place to lead an entire nation through the wilderness. And this is the detail worth holding on to because it's easy to misread this whole scene as God protecting Moses' feelings, defending his favorite, settling a personal score. That's not what's happening. God isn't defending an ego. He's defending a structure, the integrity of how leadership and revelation actually function, so that an entire nation doesn't collapse into competing voices all claiming equal authority. Miriam wasn't just criticizing a man. She was undermining the very system holding the camp together. And the moment that confrontation ends, the consequence appears. Instantly, visibly, on her own body. The cloud lifts, and in that instant, Miriam's skin turns white, leprous. White as snow, the text says. Aaron turns to look at his sister, and what he sees stops him cold. But here's the detail that should make you pause the video and rewatch the last 30 seconds. Aaron spoke too. The text told us that back in verse 1, both of them spoke against Moses. Yet only one of them is standing there covered in disease. Aaron is untouched. Why does the punishment land on her alone? There are two real answers worth sitting with, and they're both unsettling in different ways. The first is the one we already uncovered. The grammar. That feminine singular verb back in verse 1 wasn't a throwaway detail. It was the text quietly assigning responsibility, before the story even told us there'd be consequences. Miriam started this. Aaron followed. And in this account, the one who instigates carries a weight the follower doesn't. The second answer has nothing to do with guilt at all, and it's almost more unsettling. Under the law that Israel was just given, the people responsible for examining skin disease and declaring someone ritually unclean were the priests, and Aaron was the high priest. If Aaron himself had been struck with leprosy, there would have been no one left to diagnose it, no one to pronounce him unclean, no one to run the purification process at all. The system would have broken. So whether or not it was only about guilt, Aaron's office may have shielded him in a way Miriam's never could. Either way, sit with the irony of what actually happens to her body. Her skin turns white as snow, on the surface, the color of purity, of cleanness, of innocence. But underneath that white skin is the exact condition that makes her unclean, untouchable, banished from the camp. It's a complete inversion of what she had just done. Miriam's words looked righteous on the surface, a concerned sister, a faithful prophetess, simply raising a question. But underneath that surface was resentment, rivalry, a challenge to authority dressed up as concern. Now her own body wears that same contradiction, clean-looking on the outside, unclean underneath. God didn't just punish her. He turned her into a living picture of exactly what she'd just done. Aaron looks at his sister, covered in disease, and panic sets in immediately. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't argue. He turns to Moses and begs, "Please, my Lord, do not hold against us the sin we have committed. Please heal her." And now watch who responds. The person Miriam had just spoken against. The person whose authority she'd just challenged. The person who, by every human instinct, would have every right to let this consequence run its course and say nothing. That's the person who immediately cries out to God on her behalf. "Please, God, heal her." Sit with that for a second because it's easy to read past it. Moses doesn't gloat. He doesn't let her sit in disgrace as proof he was right all along. The moment his sister is struck down, his very next move is to plead for her healing. The man with the most reason to stay silent is the first one to speak up for her. And God's response is not what you'd expect from everything that came before it. This isn't permanent banishment. It isn't a life sentence. It's 7 days. 7 days outside the camp, and then she's brought back in, fully restored. But the detail that's easy to miss, the one that might be the most quietly powerful moment in the entire story, comes in verse 15. The camp doesn't move. The entire nation of Israel, on a journey toward the promised land, stops and waits for 7 days until Miriam is clean again before continuing onward. Think about what that means. This is not a story where the prophetess sins, gets punished, and gets left behind in the dust while everyone else moves on without her. The whole nation pauses. They wait for her. They will not go forward until she can come with them. The fall is real. The consequence is real. But it is not final. And that's the part of this story that turns it from a cautionary tale into something far more hopeful, because it tells you something about how God deals with failure. Discipline isn't the end of the relationship. It's not even the end of the story. It's a pause before restoration. But there's one more layer to this story, and it might be the most surprising part of all. Generations later, long after Miriam is gone, Moses is standing before a new generation of Israelites, giving them the law they'll need to live by in the promised land. And buried in the middle of those instructions, in Deuteronomy 24:9, is a command that should stop you in your tracks. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam along the way as you came out of Egypt. Think about everything you now know about her. The sister who saved Moses as a baby. The prophetess who led a nation in worship at the Red Sea, one of only 3 leaders God names as having brought Israel out of Egypt at all, and out of that entire life. This is the one moment God commands an entire nation to remember. Not the song, not the basket in the river, not the title Prophetess. This. So ask yourself why. Maybe it's not because her failure was the most important thing about her. Maybe it's because her failure became the most useful thing she ever gave to her people. Every generation after her would face the same temptation: to resent someone else's authority, to dress up jealousy as righteous concern, to speak against a leader instead of speaking to them. And every generation that remembered, Miriam had a real story about a real woman to warn them where that road leads and where it can still lead back from. Maybe Miriam's greatest act of leadership wasn't the song she led at the sea. Maybe it was the failure she became known for, because it taught humility to a nation in a way her triumphs never could. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Was Miriam punished for jealousy? For challenging a structure God himself had put in place? Or was it something quieter than that? Something about how easily we forget our own beginnings the moment we've tasted a little power, a little recognition, a little authority of our own. I genuinely want to know what you think. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this story pulled you in, there's another one waiting that you've probably never heard told properly. A woman whose name barely survives in Scripture, who shaped the entire course of Israel's history from the shadows, and who history almost completely erased. That's next. Subscribe so you don't miss her story.